Okay, I think we're ready to go.
Okay. So, welcome to all our listeners from Wimbledon, Southwest London, and beyond for this evening exploring Jewish mysticism, or Kaballah, which many consider to be the spiritual side of oral Torah. We're very grateful to welcome from Israel Professor Ronit Meroz from Tel Aviv University's Department of Jewish Philosophy and Talmud. She's agreed to distill her extensive knowledge and understanding of Jewish mysticism into a short introduction, which will focus on Kabbalah's main text, the Zohar. In terms of biography, well, Professor Meroz was born in Jaffa, and her parents both immigrated from Germany to Palestine in the 1930s. Her mother and her widowed grandmother in 1933, and her father came later, just before the war in 1938, at the age of 18, on his own, I think, from Berlin.
Right.
And Ronit now lives in Mevaseret Zion, which is just outside of Jerusalem. She's married, she's got 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. And I was thinking, who better than a Kaballah Chochmah to answer her grandchildren when they ask, so Savta, God created the world, and who created God? And she probably answers them with a question. Well, Professor Ronit's illustrious academic background began at Hebrew University. Her first degree was in maths and philosophy, followed by a master's degree and then a PhD, both in Lurianic Kabbalah. And she then taught in the Department of Jewish Thought at Hebrew U, mainly to overseas students for many years. And that sort of overlapped with teaching at Tel Aviv University, where she then stayed on and became the chair of the Department of Jewish Philosophy. Along the way, she also did research fellowships, including one that was jointly funded by UCL and King's College London, and another at the University of Pennsylvania. She supervised the research of many master's and PhD students, as well as postdoc fellows, not only in Israel, but also in Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, where Paula and I are from. And she's been on the editorial board of various Jewish studies journals. She's authored a long list of journal articles in Hebrew, English, and German, and several books on Kabbalah, including one entitled The Pearl, the Matzah, and the Fish, the spiritual biography of Rashbi, for which she won in 2019 the Matinel Prize from the World Union of Jewish Studies. She also recently, just as I suppose Israel was coming out of COVID lockdown, she recently launched her newest book called Headwaters of the Zohar, which deals with the Zohar's treatment of Parashat Shemot, Exodus, for which she received the 2020 Ben Tzvi Award for the best book of Jewish communities of the East. And we hope that book, or I certainly, my Hebrew wouldn't be up to it, so I hope it gets translated into English, which you say is the prospect. So I expect Ronit's talk will make us eager to learn more about the big questions of Kabbalah. And well, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and hopefully Professor Ronit will answer them when her talk is completed. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ronit. And Ronit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for your kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me over. Thank you. I'm thanking the Wimbledon Synagogue and our matchmaker, Alinda. Yeah, it's very emotional for me to speak with the British communities and some people from the British community. And I won't go into detail why, but I will be happy to share with you some of my knowledge. So let me share my presentation. Here. So this is the general title. And you see also the drawing which was put on your poster, on the poster of the synagogue. And the reason why I chose this drawing is because many of the Kabbalists were studying in groups or fraternities. And very often they left their synagogues or shuls and studied outside. So this is typical for what's happening for many generations, not always, but in some cases. In this lecture, I will have, there will be two parts. The first one would be a very brief description of Kabbalah, its origins and its major characteristics. So you get some kind of an idea what we're talking about. You know, it will be partial. It will be only some major points, not everything, but it will be, will get you some kind of an idea. The second part will give you another, an idea from another point of view. And this is by reading an example from the Zohar. I chose the first page of the first volume of the Zohar, not because it's the beginning, but because it is beautiful. And the title which I gave the text, the original text doesn't have any title. The title I gave was is The Rose and the Cup of Benediction, as you'll see. So let's start with part A. First of all, as emerges from your introduction, Kabbalah is indeed part of Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism, or just like any mysticism, basically, not only, but basically deals with some kind of contact between human beings and God, or human beings and the divine world, or human beings and the celestial upper world. The contact might be direct, like a vision of God, or you hear God, or you hear his message, and the contact of God to God and the upper world might be indirect, as it would be in the example I will bring on part B. But I want to emphasize, Kabbalah is not Jewish mysticism, but part of Jewish mysticism. It's not equated. It is only a certain portion of Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism, depending on your point of view, might have begun in the Bible. I'll read some texts for you, and then I'll explain why not everybody considers it as mysticism. It's no doubt Jewish, but the question is whether it is mysticism. So in Deuteronomy 4, here, I guess all of you know that text describes the revelation at Mount Sinai. And it says, you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain. Oh, the photos, just a second, I have to squeeze the photos because they hide. Okay, now it's okay. They hide the text, so I cannot see it. Oh, now I can see it. Okay. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form. That is, it was somehow abstract. There was only a voice. Or in other words, later on in that chapter, you saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore, watch yourself very carefully so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourself an idol, an image of any shape. From that text or from that tendency in the Bible, it seems that if there is an image, it's close to idolatry. But this is not the case in many other passages in the Bible. In other parts of the Bible, we do have an image, and the prophets do see an image of God. For example, Ezekiel 1, chapter 1, where God is seen by Ezekiel riding a chariot, or in Hebrew, a merkava. And Ezekiel starts telling his own biography. While I was among the exiles by the Kaballah River, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. I saw an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. And in the fire, there was what looked like 4 living creatures. And the text goes on to describe the 4 creatures and the faces and how the chariot they're part of is moving up and down, east and west, and so forth. But over their heads, the heads of those creatures, was what looked like a throne. And high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man, meaning this is God, like a man, looks like a man. So he does have a form. In another text, in Isaiah chapter 6, you probably all know that text from the prayer. Isaiah speaks about his own experience. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe, that sounds like human being, of a shape of a human being, felt that the word in Hebrew is heichal, and it might be translated as temple or a chamber within the temple, or probably the Holy of the Holiest within the temple. So a specific chamber within it. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings, they covered their faces. With 2, they covered their feet. And with 2, they were flying. And they were calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Likewise, you can find other texts in Daniel 7, for example, where you have the very famous image of what is called the Ancient of Days, who has not only a robe and a throne, but his hair, he has a hair, white hair, just like an old person. So you have different descriptions of God, or let's put it otherwise, you have in the Bible, you have lots of descriptions of experiences when unique people get closer to God and either see him or hear him, or sometimes get a message through an angel or some other ways. Ipso facto, you also have a description of God. Here, at least in the last 2 texts I've read, he looks like a human being seated on a throne, and so forth and so forth. So this sounds like mysticism, including a description of God. But the question is whether it should be named mysticism. Some of my teachers, for example, and I mentioned that fact that they were my teachers because it might be a question of a generation. I think my younger students wouldn't wonder about that. But the generation of my teachers said, well, the Bible is sui generis. It's something different. It's not mysticism. You speak about prophets who were messengers of God. They didn't ask to be prophets. They were chosen by God. They were sent by God. They were told to go and bring the message to the people of Israel. Whereas mysticism would depend on the search of human beings to get nearer to God. They look for it, they want it, they ask for it, they spend their lives in techniques that would lead them into experiencing God, either by seeing or by hearing or whatever. Here, they didn't practice any technique. They were chosen and sent. So it depends on your perception, whether you call it mysticism or not. In any case, it's of course Jewish. In any case, for sure, you have some kind, or those prophets had some kind of contact with God or the divine world. Be it this way or be it that way, the interesting thing is that in the first millennium, in this common era, you know, the Bible was written before that common era. So when we jump into the next millennium, that is the first millennium of this common era, there were people who wanted to imitate those prophets and gain the same experiences by their own will and deeds, not because they were chosen by God, but by spending a life of an ascetic life, fasting, praying, using incantations and all sorts of other means in order to get and see what they call the beauty of God. They were attracted to that beauty. So now we move to another chapter in Jewish mysticism, not yet Kabbalah, and it is being written in the first millennium of this common era. And the researchers call their literature, the text they wrote that didn't have any title. And you get, you get lots of texts which are all messed up. You know, they're very ancient, they're not organized. So the researcher called those texts Merkava literature or Echalot literature. They call it this way because they try to imitate and recreate the vision of Ezekiel and see the Merkava, or recreate and see the Heichal which Isaiah saw. And because those terms are so common in that literature, the researcher called that literature Merkava literature or Echalot literature, either or both. This kind of literature is being written in the Middle East sometime in the first millennium. We don't know whether it is in the 2nd century, in the 4th century, or in the 9th, or maybe both, or maybe it was rewritten or something. We don't know. We don't know whether it's the land of Israel or maybe it's Babylon. It's either or both. We don't have enough information. And just to give you a bit of a taste of what it is like, I brought some some lines from those texts translated by Peter Schäfer. The original texts are being published in a synopsis published, synopsis of the Echalot literature, that's the technical name. And here we find at the first text, we find what an angel is saying up there in heaven. He is expecting the mystics to ascend to heaven. He's yearning for their ascent. So does, by the way, God, but I didn't find a beautiful text. So they're waiting for them to practice their techniques so that they would ascend, and then the angels would help them, would assist them in their ascent. Interestingly enough, although we think of this world as a lower one and the heavenly one as a higher one, and I said, and all of us say that we ascend to heaven, for some reason we can't explain. In their eyes, the mystics descended into the Merkava. So I don't know why. But in any case, the angel says, when will he, the mystic, descend, he who descends to the Merkava? When will he see the pride of the heights? When the word pride in Hebrew includes also the element of beauty. So the angel invites the mystic to see the beauty of the angels, the fire, the divine fire, the beauty of God himself. But it will not result only in the vision of a marvelous, beautiful view, but also when will he hear the ultimate salvation? That is, it is written in the time when the Jewish people is in exile, no doubt after the destruction of the second temple, but we don't know exactly when. And they are awaiting a messianic era, and at least they would like to know when it would come. So if they go up to heaven, they might know the answer. Well, when will he see what no eye has ever seen because of its beauty and because most people don't? These are special people who are really devoting their lives to their own mission of ascending to heaven. When will he again ascend and proclaim the seed of Abraham, his beloved? That is, he will come back to, here the word ascend is the opposite term for descent. They descend to the Merkava, and like what we say, and then they ascend back to earth, and then they will proclaim and tell the people of Israel when the salvation is about to come. And the angel also promises to assist the mystic on this dangerous path, because evil angels, evil demons might hurt him. And even good angels might hurt him, because he might want to ascend to heaven when he's not pure enough. And if he's not pure enough, he might be killed on the way. So here the angel promises and tells him and soothes his fears. Don't be afraid, son of the beloved seed. Enter and see the king in his beauty. You shall neither be destroyed nor burnt up. So this gives you a glimpse of Jewish mysticism in the first millennium, and yet it's not Kabbalah. So in short, a short summary would be that in the first millennium, they have visions of God and of the heavenly world by unique, special people, and they ipso facto get to know the nature of God and the divine world, and they express their expectations of the Messiah or salvation. And what I didn't go into is that there are several aspects of magic involved in it, for example, they use the adjuration of angels in order to safeguard their path or the journey, or in order to get more knowledge about the salvation of Israel. Of course, they don't use any kind of, I would say, I wouldn't even say black or white magic, but they don't use any mundane magic. They're not interested in money or in love or in whatever kind of magic you could think of. And this is the place where they, in any case, they use holy names and combination of letters and all sorts of such adjurations. But we won't deal with it here, except for one little sentence later on. So now when we move on to the second millennium, this is where Kabbalah, as a strict term, starts. Kabbalah is part of Jewish mysticism, part of Jewish mysticism, the second millennium. For example, we do have Hasidut, and this is also a variation of Kabbalah, but this will appear later on, in the 18th century. In comparison to the features which I've mentioned earlier, here we do have, again, visions of God, visions of the heavenly world, again, the unique mystics. But we also have what I'll try to show you on the example which I chose from the Zohar. We have a new understanding, and this is different from what happens before in the first millennium, a new understanding of the mitzvot and other deeds and rituals. Some of the rituals are invented by them, just like the one which I'll mention now. And they are open for everybody. And not only that they are open for everybody, everybody's invited. Everybody can share this kind of very mild mysticism, which doesn't involve the actual vision of God, but experiences God's reflection in this world. And you'll see this in my example. So we'll turn to it in a minute. The third aspect of the, is just like the earlier mysticism. Very often, not all the Kabbalists, but very often we find among the Kabbalists of the second millennium an expectation of a new messianic era, and either to try to calculate the end or describe the end, or even usher it in one way or another. We have, just like in earlier phases of mysticism, we do have magic. We do have at that age of the second millennium some kind of a division into two areas. One is called, very often, not always, but very often it's called theoretical Kabbalah, and one is called practical Kabbalah. So in the practical Kabbalah, you have lots of magic. In the theoretical Kabbalah, you have a bit of it, as much as it helps you understand the divinity. And I won't touch about it anymore. The most important difference between Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism in the second millennium is the new descriptions of the nature of God. Whereas the most common one in the first millennium was that one of God in the form of a human being seated on the throne, and so forth and so forth, including a big entourage of angels. Here, in most cases, again, this is an introduction, so I'm making it very general. The descriptions are general, but the most important feature that they usually speak of God as a combination of infinity and 10 Sefirot, and I'll go into it in a minute. And at the same time, they speak very much, that's very typical for that phase, they speak very much of our ability to influence God, to mold God, to shape God. And this is in general included in the term which you probably know, tikkun. So let's go into that. God is infinite, but God has some 10 aspects which are attached to this infinity, and they're finite. They are called 10 Sefirot. They describe the powers of God, the attributes of God, the way, his actions in the world, the way he functions in this world. For example, God has chokhmah, that is wisdom, or binah, intelligence, because you can look at this world, and this world has the laws of nature. Where did the laws of nature come from? From God. And this is because God is wise and has wisdom and intelligence. He knew how to create that world according to one of his attributes, that is, or some of his attributes, wisdom and intelligence. At the same time, God is very often merciful or judgmental. He knows how to punish, and he knows how to have compassion over his creatures. So those attributes, again, mercy is finite, because once God is merciful, he is not punishing. So this is a finite aspect which is attached, which is an expression of the infinite attributes of God. So he has, as we know from our lives, we know from the Bible, we know from anywhere else, God is sometimes merciful or punishing or compassionate. The next three Sefirot, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, or endurance, splendor, and foundation, are in fact a reflection of the upper three, mercy, judgment, and compassion. And again, their endurance is more like mercy, splendor is more like judgment, foundation is more like compassion. Compassion is some kind of balance between mercy and judgment, and the same way foundation is some kind of balance between, it doesn't sound from the term, but it is endurance and splendor. The reason they add this triad is so that they get a beautiful number of 10, just like you have any other numbers, like the 10 commandments or the 10 sayings or whatever. And the last one is maybe the most important one. It's called Malchut. Through it, or kingdom, through it God rules this world. Or it is also called Shekhinah, a term I'm sure you know, because God, Shochen, resides in this world, or creates the contact with us human beings in this world. A very common chart of those 10 Sefirot, again, is this one. This one specifically was drawn in the 18th century. But it represents earlier ideas. Infinity is not mentioned, of course, in this chart, because you can't make a chart of infinity, but a representation of the 10 Sefirot is here marked. And here I'm comparing the list and the chart, and you can see that judgment is on the left, and this is the so to say bubble or ball or I don't know what on the left, a circle on the left, because it is harsh, And whereas the circle on the right is mercy, and the compassion is balances the two, and is you can find it in the middle. It's balancing between the two attributes, conflicting attributes of God. In the same way, we have the second triad, and then below we have the Shekhinah, where you can see in this chart that it has an influx down here on our world. It sends, it illuminates our world. This chart sort of, it's called sometimes, the lines which connect these circles are called sometimes pipes. These are pipes of influx, pipes that create a unity of those 10 aspects, because the influx is streaming from one part of it to another. Now, it's not only a new description of God here, of remember the finite aspects of God, but the most important thing, or just as important thing, is that we may have an influence on that structure. Once we give food to our neighbor, we enhance the Sephirot which are on the right, which are the benevolent Sephirot. We make the water, so to say, the influx becomes stronger. If we take, we steal, we kill, we curse, we invigorate the God's Sephirot on the left, his ability to punish, his ability to be angry with us, according to the Bible. God is very often angry with us. And so it depends on the behavior of human beings, whether they enhance certain qualities of God, the benevolent ones, or the harsh ones, like judgment and the other ones on the left. We very often, I didn't put the right, I don't know where some kind, one of the charts is lost. I guess we'll find it later on. In order to explain this idea of influence on the divinity, they very often describe the Sephirot on the right, the ones which are merciful, as white Sephirot or masculine ones. The Sephirot on the right are called or described as red ones and as feminine ones. So femininity is definitely not considered too in a good way, in an appreciative way. So we have right and left, masculine and feminine, white and red and other colors, which I'm not going to go into. And it's also the upper, at the same time, they see the divinity as the upper part is masculine and the lower part, especially the Shekhinah, is again feminine, according also to its, name in Hebrew, which is a feminine name, Shekhinah or Malchut. And also because of its feminine features, the good feminine features, as taking care of humanity and feeding it with influx and, in fact, actually creating the world, ruling the world, trying to take care of the world. So, the last page will probably appear later on, but now you know it already. In any case, you have to remember those two features. First of all, we have a new understanding of the divinity as infinity plus 10 finite sephirot, which are white and red, masculine and feminine, judgmental or compassionate, and so forth. Let's move now to the second part, which is an example from the Zohar. Again, as I said, from the first page of the Zohar. Briefly, very briefly describing the Zohar, I will say that it was mostly, not all of its text, but it's a very voluminous book, 5 volumes, altogether about 2,500 pages long, mostly written in the 13th century in the Iberian Peninsula. Although it is attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I didn't write his full name, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but his acronym, because I just didn't have enough room. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived, the historical Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in the 2nd century, in this common era, in the land of Israel. He was a Tanna, a Mishnaic scholar. But the Zohar is attributed to him, although all researchers think, unlike the tradition, that this book was mostly written about 1,000 years later. Again, I bring this drawing because this is very typical specifically for the Zohar, for the authors of the Zohar. We think that many people wrote it, not only one. Although it is attributed to one, they probably functioned as either as one fraternity or as many fraternities, one following the other or living at the same time, having all sorts of dialogues. And they specifically liked very much to study their Torah right at the bosom of nature, let's put it like that. This is, by the way, very much like the Franciscan monks who were flourishing at the same time in Spain. They also like to wander around in nature. So this would be it as an introduction. And now we move to the first page. And the first page of the Zohar starts with a meditation about the rose. A rose you can find in your garden. A rose you can find in a vase. A rose you might find in nature, maybe. And, when, just like us, when we watch a rose, we first of all think of its beauty. We're impressed by its beauty. We notice its colors. We probably think of many ladies who are called Rose, and we probably think of love. Even today, lovers bring roses to their beloved. And if we're educated, and I'm sure my audience is educated, and you all think of the Song of Songs, just like the author of that paragraph we're going to read now. This is a literary description in the Song of Songs. You have a literary description of the beloved who is just like a rose among the thorns. So the author of that section of the Zohar, or the first page of the Zohar, might have watched the flower and meditate upon it, and he this text, which is here being, I bring Daniel Matt's translation, and this is how the Zohar starts. Rabbi Chizkiah, this is one of the members. I don't know who it is, because it's not a real name. Nobody in Spain was called Chizkiah, and just nobody in Spain was called Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But they're using old names. It's what you call a pseudoepigraphy. So he watched the rose and he said, "Oh, I'm thinking of the Song of Songs. As a rose, Shoshana, among thorns, so is my beloved among the maidens. So he has this literary association. He's wondering, who is the rose? He has another association. He thinks of the rabbinic writings, where in the rabbinic writings, the rose turns into a symbol of the assembly of Israel. So the Song of Songs originally tells the love story of two human beings, a woman and a man, a young woman and a young man. But the rabbinic writings turn the story into a love story between God and the assembly of Israel, that is the people of Israel. But the term assembly of Israel is also, among the Kabbalists, is also another name for the Shekhinah. So here we have moved from the actual rose to the Song of Songs to the rabbinic writings, and oops, we have jumped into the Kabbalistic ways of thinking. Once he thinks of the Shekhinah, he thinks of the divine world, but he isn't the first one to think about it. Dali, for example, described a rose hovering above earth, in a very similar way. For him, for Dali, the rose wasn't only the mundane material rose, it was something which symbolizes something else. So no wonder the Zohar had another idea of a rose, something which is sublime. And he thinks again of those 10 Sefirot right away. And the lowest one, he thinks about the lowest one, which is Shekhinah, or kingdom, and is also the assembly of Israel. It is sort of, assembly of Israel is here on earth, but the assembly of Israel has some kind of being, spiritual being up there in heaven. So it's the same chart which you have seen. And here is the last chart. You see, just, you don't need it anymore. It just shows you that on the right, it's white, and on the left, it's red. And the Shekhinah, and that's a very important aspect, is both. It receives the influx from both the right side of the divinity and the left side. It receives two kinds of influx. The Shekhinah is some kind of a combination of both mercy and judgment. And therefore, does the Kabbalist say, this is why a rose is red and white, because it symbolizes the upper Shekhinah, which is also red and white. And the Shekhinah is the assembly of Israel, and includes, as I said, judgment and compassion. Incidentally, Daniel Matt, the translator, went and looked for the actual roses like that, and he found out, interestingly enough, that those kind of roses, which are white and red, were first introduced into Europe by the Crusaders. They brought the seeds of those roses from Palestine. When they came back from their journey, they brought the seeds. So those kind of roses were new in the 13th century in Europe, or specifically in Spain. And the author of this passage thinks of such a rose, white and red, and sees in that rose not only beauty and love, mundane love, but also divine love of God, and the inner structure of God as a combination of judgment and mercy. And this is why it's white and red. He also notices, this author, that a rose has not only 13 petals, and by the way, a rose might have many petals, and you'll see why in a minute, you'll see why he chose 13 and not any other number. But the rose has 5 sepals surrounding it. which are green and different. And now you have to meditate with him. When he watches a bud of a rose, he sees in it the structure of the Sefirot. And now you can see that why he chose the number 13, because in Gematria, which you don't like, Claudia, I know. In any case, it's good for his goal, let's put spiritual goal. In Gematria, 1, or the word 1 in Hebrew, echad, is 13 in Gematria. So he speaks about 13 petals because they create a unity. And this bud, he sees, when he watches that bud, he sees the unity of the Sefirot. He sees how this little rose in his own garden represent or reflects the divinity, and how it protects the most feminine aspect of its own, that is the Shekhinah, in such a sort of envelopes it all with guarding qualities of compassion. You see here, I compare, you see the original chart, and you see how it, in his view, it turns into a bud, a bud of a rose, which you can see. And here I put the two images, one on top of the other. So you see the rose, and you see that it fits, the rose fits the image of the Sefirot. By the way, my sweet niece, Yuli Meroz, did that drawing for me. So he goes on to think of something else. Oh, by the way, I picked up from my own garden such a little nice bud, and I thought this is a nice, not only in view, but this is nice to meditate upon that. But now he goes on to think that not only you can see the Sefirot in it, but you can see something which is relevant to your ritual world. And here he says that this bud, in fact, resembles the cup of benediction. So what he says, here I brought a cup of wine. You can't see, you can see the silver, you cannot see the red wine in it. But my fingers are now, can you see me? Because I cannot see myself. My 5 fingers are now resembling the 5 sepals, and the cup of benediction, which is white and has red wine in it, resembles the rose and the Sefirot, and the 5 fingers are protecting the divine world. So the author writes, the 5 sepals surrounding the rose are called salvations. Concerning this mystery, it is written, I will raise the cup of salvations. And this is part of the benediction you say, the blessing you say over a cup of benediction. And this is the cup of benediction, which should rest on 5 fingers. Now, it seems that he was inventing, just as many other Kabbalists did, a new ritual. Whereas most of us hold a cup like that, he was inventing a ritual where you hold the same cup of benediction in this way. You raise it up. And once you raise it, you, with the power of your thought, with your understanding of the unity of God, which should be a combination of red and white, you uplift the divinity itself. So by doing that and meditating about it while you do it, not only when you're in the garden, But while you lift up this cup of benediction, you have a benevolent influence on the divinity, and you help bring in salvation and harmony into this world. Just to, well, I should drink in your, in your honor. I'll drink a bit of that. In honor of the reform movement in Britain. So here again, you know, all the images are put one on the other. You can hardly see the cup, but if you look well, you would see it's there. So they're all united into one image on which he, the author of that paragraph, meditated. And now, just to end this lecture, I would say that again, you know, it sounds weird that you meditate about a cup of wine, but here, René Magritte, Dali was, you know, Catalan painter or artist. René Magritte was Belgian, and here he sees a cup of wine, not just any cup, a cup of wine, which is again something sublime and connects this world and the firmament, let's put it like that, or sky or something above. So that's, the Zohar is not that unusual. By thinking of such an image. To wind this lecture up, I would say that here you don't have an extreme kind of mysticism. Nobody gets into ecstasy. Nobody sees the image of God or hears God. But in their own imagination, they do see the reflection of the attributes of God in their lives, in their rituals, and they meditate about it and believe that with this meditation, they can improve, that is, bring tikkun to the divinity and to this world. Thank you very much. And I'm open for your questions. I'll stop sharing it and I can see all of you again.
Thank you. I have a first question while other people are composing their questions. You mentioned the Franciscan monks in Spain who were active at the same time as the early Kaballah groups. Was there a general sort of influence of Christianity or any influence of Christianity on Kaballah, do you think?
Well, this is a very long answer, and yes. If we, there is, the answer changes according to the time and to the place, whether the texts, you know, where the texts were written and what kind of Christianity or Islam were around. Specifically during the time of the Zohar, we have an interesting situation where the authors, in fact, are in a very, the authors of the Zohar must have been in a very delicate situation where on one hand, the Christianity or the Christian kingdoms were very dominant and were trying to attract some of the Jews to convert. There were lots of conversions, either because of spiritual reasons or because of materialistic considerations like jobs, money, food. Sometimes they talk about eating. So on one hand, there are probably thousands of people who convert, and but the tensions sort of start to build up. What will end up with the expulsion from Spain, the tensions start to build up. There is a lot of attraction and there is a lot of hatred. And there are a lot of expectations for some kind of relief from this situation. And at the same time, they were very often creating a mirror theology to the Christian one. You think this one is the Messiah? We think he was the Satan. We speak of someone who in many ways resembled your Messiah, but is standing against him and is a different person. So they, put two different images. One is the mirror of the other, but there's lots of similarities between the two images, either of the Messiah himself or of the Messianic era, or even they were talking about, where there were there was restlessness in the Christian society about the second coming of the Messiah. Interestingly enough, we don't know why, but it so happens that the Jews speak about the same dates, but they speak of a different Messiah, of course, and their picture is similar but very different and opposing. So we know that there were very tight connections between the different societies. They were learning from each other. The Franciscans learned from the Jews as well. It was, going both ways. And there was lots of friction, either we know today, or even in the markets, when people met, or among the elite who corresponded. For example, a very famous Kabbalist who wasn't part of the Zohar group, but he was living in for a while in Barcelona and other places in the 13th century, and his name was Avraham Abu Afra. He said, I feel better with spiritual Christian one than with dumb Jewish ones. I can have a dialogue with them better than with a dumb Jewish one. So there were lots of connections and very sophisticated, intricate, including they were imitating each other and they were hating each other. And the Christians wished for the death of the Jews, or at least their conversion, and vice versa. So it's a very, very complicated situation. And in any case, depends a lot on dialogue.
There are some other good questions, but just to add another aspect of the relationship of Christianity to Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, there's a lot of these dualisms, and there's a lot of
in Kabbalah
multiple aspects of everything, like 3 or 5 types of the soul, forms of the soul, and these sort of multiple forms of divine things. I mean, maybe the Christians sort of justify the Trinity that way. That, I mean, I read somewhere that there's this idea of there's one sun, but the sun emits many, many rays. And that's a sort of Kabbalistic idea. But so they, maybe they're trying to say there's one God, but it sort of manifests in 3 parts. But Kabbalah has a lot of things like that manifest in multiple parts. So I know, like, for example, well, I think in North London, there's a Kabbalah center. I've never been there, but people who've been there say it's really about Christian Kabbalah. And, you know, elsewhere, I'm sure in California or wherever, there's a lot of Christian Kabbalah. So they maybe justify their Christian beliefs as coming out of this Jewish mystical theory or philosophy.
Okay. I'll tell you, well, again, I could go into that for about a year, but I'll give some main points. I'll say, first of all, the Kabbalah was kept as a secret for many centuries, or the Jewish mysticism, and it became somehow, it sort of emerged from the elite people who kept it as a secret sometime at the beginning of the 13th century. And it made a big scandal, so it seems. And the first opponents of Kabbalah were complaining saying exactly the same. They said, well, the Christians believe in 3, you believe in 10 or 11 or more. You worship idols. There is a long letter which we have from the beginning of the 13th century saying just like that. But it's all, in this question, there are lots of aspects involved, and the aspects are including politics, question of power between groups of people, and also philosophical questions. So if I'm giving the aspect of politics or I would say the struggle between the struggle of power between certain groups, it seems that at the beginning, the Kabbalists faced lots of criticism, but later on in the 13th century, very important leaders of the Jewish community, like Nachmanides, and later on Rashba, who were really the most important leaders of Judaism at that time, they accepted Kabbalah. And with their authority, it was also accepted by others. And it's true that later on, some people did criticize the Kabbalists for this, but basically ever since, this criticism has sort of vanished. And, the Kabbalists have usually replied, well, we might talk about 10 aspects of God, but just like in the presentation which I showed you, the most important thing is that those 10 sefirot are one. And this was a major point in this presentation. The petals sort of unite into, so to say, one bud, and it's a unity. And most people accepted that answer. You might still argue, but the interesting thing is, everything goes upside down and changes. There is a branch of theology which is called very often Christian Kabbalah, which the beginnings of it start in the 13th century, in fact, in Spain, but it becomes very strong in Italy as of the 15th century. And they learn Kabbalah, and they see it, since the Kabbalists say the Kabbalah is ancient, they say, you see, this is a proof for the truth of Christianity. You speak of 10, we speak of 3, and they are one, and everything is fine. And this Christian Kabbalah was very important, was very influential. It, for example, influenced the creation, the ideas of the Freemasons. So you have the indirect influence of Kabbalah on the operas of Mozart, who was a Freemason. So also on Newton, he was indirectly influenced also. So there is a long history of those ideas going back and forth and changing. But I want to end this answer with one philosophical aspect of it. And this is that you have to think of, you have to think of a major philosophical question. Once you think of God as infinite, as transcendental, as a being which is not involved in this world, you're faced with severe questions of how does this God function in this world? Because he needs some kind of a bridge, which will bridge between infinity and this finite world. And the Kabbalists, in fact, had a brilliant idea. They said, this is why it's a brilliant idea, and this is why it became so popular. Because they say, yes, it's true, God is infinite, but it has part and parcel of that infinity also a finite aspect which can touch the finite world. And here we call them in general 10 Sefirot, but in fact there are an infinite number of aspects. So they are trying to solve a very ancient philosophical question of how does the infinite God create the contact with this world without receiving any blemish, without being contaminated, without contaminating the infinite aspect, which should always stay transcendental. So this is just one answer among many. Nobody has in fact managed to solve that problem. Nobody on earth. We keep talking about an infinite God, but we still don't understand it. The only difference between the Kabbalists and us and modern people is that we have stopped trying to answer. We know it's a riddle we'll never solve. So we have stopped. The later Jewish philosophers stopped asking that question and just accept it as a fact. God is infinite, our world is finite, and that's it. And they live one next to the other in some miraculous way. You see? So they have a solution. You might not like the solution, but it's a very intelligent one.
Okay, we've got some other questions. First, a quick one. Someone's asking what the words Kaballah and Zohar translate to in English, and I think I know the answer to that, but yes. You can answer.
Yes, Kaballah means, it comes from the root lekabel, receive. Any just like the same term reception desk at the hotel, Kaballah is also, you receive something. Here you receive an ancient knowledge when you go on transferring it to the later generation. So it comes from ancient generation and it's being transferred one generation after the other. Zohar means, in fact, splendor. So it speaks about
radiance. Radiance. I've heard it.
You may translate it, either. I think Daniel Matt translates it as the Book of Splendor. Others sometimes translate it as radiance or synonyms.
By the way, so is that the first full English translation that he did, which is quite recent, isn't it?
It is recent. It's not the first. It's not full.
Okay.
It's a modern one. That's the difference. Okay. We have dozens of translations to different languages. None of them is full. This book is so voluminous. This book is so, long and complicated. Danny Matt never finished, he decided he would do this part of the Zohar, not the other parts, and that's it. He spent I think 30 years or something like that on translating whatever he did. Yeah, so this is the most modern one and very beautiful English. Yeah.
Okay. Someone's asking, is there the belief about reincarnation in Kabbalah, and how is it explained?
Yeah, well, many of the Kabbalists believed in reincarnation. Again, as of the 12th century, probably not earlier, maybe a bit earlier, but not much earlier. Sometimes it was very popular, for example, in Safed in the 16th century, where we have Luria and Cordovero. The whole time believed in reincarnation. Basically, when you believe in reincarnation, it's a kind of a theory which should explain the justice of God. You know, sometimes you have an evil person and he has a wonderful life, and sometimes you have a righteous one and he has a horrible life. How do you explain that? You bring up the idea of reincarnation, and you have a beautiful solution, so that even if you don't get either the punishment or the benefits of being righteous or whatever, then you get it either in this life or the next one. Interestingly enough, in the 16th century, you know, I mentioned Safed, it was also sort of, I would say, a pre-psychological theory. That is, how do you explain the nature of that personality and in comparison to another? You explain it by, you know, this is totally psychological and nothing to do with punishment or whatever. You explain it because by the fact that you were a scholar in that life, in earlier life, or you were a butcher in that life, or a mohel, or this or that. And even if you're not a scholar now, you have the, you know, those characteristics now. So this is, you know, a very an interesting attempt to explain psychology. Psychological. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So another interesting question from Paul Ashton. Can you briefly outline the connections between Kabbalah and Jewish involvement in alchemy?
Well, I don't know too much about it, but for example, a favorite, you know, I didn't go into it because it involves, you know, aspects of research which I didn't go into it. But basically, one of my favorite Kabbalists, who was Vital, Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was the most important student of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the lion in Safed. This was his profession. He made money by being a doctor, which involved alchemy as well, and the knowledge of herbs. And he must have read lots of texts which were available in Safed from all sorts of other places. Yeah, so this is one example. I know I should think, but I can, it's not that conspicuous, but some of them were involved in alchemy.
Can I just ask again about the authorship? You talked about Rabbi
Shimon Bar Yochai.
Shimon Bar Yochai as being the author. I read that it was Moses de Leon in Spain, and he wasn't very well known, and he wanted the Zohar to be accepted, so he attributed it to this very famous Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's a kind of reverse plagiarism.
Yes, so, or in technical words, pseudepigraphy. Yeah. Well, in order, you know, there are two aspects to speak about, and they depend again about the point of view. first of all, the question of authorship, and then the question of attribution or plagiarism. The question of authorship, I told you that the tradition has it that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the book, and this is because he is the most important speaker on that book. And in fact, in one of the sections of the Zohar, he tells his secretary, Rabbi Abba, please write down and keep it for generations to come. Write down my lectures, so to say, and keep it for the generations to come. So this claim is based on what is written in the Zohar. But many Kabbalists, as you know, or let me add another point. The book was first known, or the text was first only known or revealed or published to the public at the end of the 13th century, on the verge between the 13th and 14th. And already then people were wondering, where was it from since the 2nd century? Who kept it? How come we never knew about it? And ever since at that time, in the 13th century, people wondered whether it wasn't Rabbi Moshe de Leon who had the text and said, hey, look at it. If you want to read it, I'll sell it to you. And they blamed him for writing it and attributing it to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So the history of research is like that, including the rabbis as of the 13th century, is that many rabbis and later researchers found, 200 proofs, something like that, an immense number of proofs that it could not have been written at the time of Rashbi. It knows, for example, of the Muslim rule of the Temple Mount. This happened in the 7th century. How did Rashbi know that? They know about the Crusaders' loss in battle in 1292 in Acre. How do you know that?
If he was a prophet.
Yeah, that's what
a prophet, maybe.
Yeah. So there are endless number of proofs. So it's clear that most of it couldn't have been written before the end of the 13th century. Now, the second question is not only when, but by whom. At first, people thought that it was Moshe de Leon because he said, I can sell it to you. And not only that, he has some writings in the Zohar is written in Aramaic. He has some writings in Hebrew where he writes in a similar genre. But later on, researchers found out that there are also not only similarities, but contradictions between the Zohar and Moshe de Leon. This is why, and there's, again, lots of other problems. For example, inconsistency between the within the different parts of the Zohar. And this is why most of the scholars, like 90% of the scholars today, think that the Zohar must have been authored by many people. Maybe Moshe de Leon did contribute some, but many people contributed, and it was written and rewritten and elaborated and censored and whatnot. This is, by the way, one of the major things I wrote about in my book about Exodus. I showed how it was written and rewritten, the headwaters of the Zohar. So, so this is the question of authorship. Researchers and rabbis changed their perceptions of how it was written. Now, the question is of why do you attribute it to Rashbi? This is a real riddle. You know that many of the rabbinic writings were attributed to others. And this is a sort of a genre. This is a typical genre. You don't ask then why did you do that? So why ask about the Zohar? The Zohar tries to imitate in a very common genre in the rabbinical writings, and write in the same way, sort of a continuation of old knowledge. You know, to make it short, I will say that. Okay? Yeah.
Well, there's so much more to go into. Like, you know, I'd like to hear about the differences between Lurianic Kabbalah and what went before, and so on. And well, we've got a question from Bruno, who says, how should one approach the study of the Zohar? Where should you start? And, you know, what is the good support literature? So that's a big question, really.
It's a huge question. If you want a short introduction, then there's a short introduction which is beautifully written, but, you know, helps you a little bit only because it's short. There is a very long introduction. If you read that, you know a lot. So the first introduction is an introduction to Daniel Matt's translation. The introduction itself was written by Arthur Green, Art Green, is an American rabbi, by the way, rabbi and professor. And I think it's called Introduction to the Zohar. I don't have it here on my desk. I cannot see it right now, but I can write to you later on. I think it's Introduction to the Zohar. But in any case, you have the name of the author and you have the word introduction. And if you want to have a long introduction, which is really excellent, but it's not fully up to date, you should read what was originally written by Isaiah or Yeshayahu Tishbi, and was translated into English, and it's called The Wisdom of the Zohar. It's a very voluminous book, but it's excellent. And then maybe start reading the Zohar itself. If you don't know any Aramaic or Hebrew, use Daniel Matt's translation, which has the advantage of having lots of many notes and commentaries, so it's very helpful. And take courses.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of the questions, and we have many expressions of thanks to you in the comments, and I'd like to echo that. It was wonderful that you didn't just talk about the structure of all of the, and the sort of enumerating the aspects of everything, but we got a flavor that is the nature of Kabbalah. But you really sort of showed us some examples with the story of the rose and the cup. And yeah, indeed, I've seen a lot of people when they make kiddush.
Oh, you did?
They hold the cup that way, the wine cup, like
okay,
that.
So they're influenced by the Zohar. Wonderful. Yeah. I know it's especially the Reform movement likes that ritual for some reason. The others less so. Some of the Hasidim and the Reform movement. Yeah, wonderful.
Well, so thank you very much, and yes, we should keep in touch, and maybe we could do some. Remember, I suggested that maybe you give us a little talk on Shavuot.
Yeah, thank God I didn't agree because we had war.
I know. Yeah, I know. So that didn't work, but you know, that's a great time for studying Kabbalah, I think. And yes. you had war, and before that you had the Meron as well, which is related.
Yeah. Yes. We had some other problems too, but we won't go into that. National ones, I mean.
Sure. Yeah, well, yeah, we wish you a new government in a short number of days.
Yeah.
And And yes, and thank you very much again.
You're welcome, and I say good night, Britain. Good night.
Good night. Lala Tov. Toda
Yes,
Rabba.
and it's
Lilac
late
Tov
at
and
night.
all the best.
It's middle of the night for
Shalom.
you, isn't it?
Pardon?
Yeah. Okay. So join
Good
me.
night,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you very
Say goodbye
much.
now.
Bye-bye. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.